Hey, welcome back to the channel. It's been quite a minute. I haven't checked, but it's been months, maybe even over a year at this point, since I've made a video and posted. It's been on my mind, but life has been really, really busy. Before going to the rest of the video, just want to preface, I'm home with my son August for the weekend. My wife's out of town on a work trip, so if you see him running around in the background, there's nothing I can do. That's just how it is. So, but man, I'm so excited to be making videos again and hopefully to encourage you guys. Just want to let you know what kind of my game plan is going forward with today's video and hopefully with a future series of videos. So today's video will hopefully be a kind of a kickoff for a series of videos in which I explain questions that folks may have about Anglicanism and about kind of higher church theology or tradition. For those of you who don't know, the reason I haven't been making so many videos is because life's been kind of crazy, and my wife and I have now become Anglicans. We are part of the Anglican Church in North America. We've moved to Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm the family ministries director at an Anglican church there. So we've made quite a drastic move from Pentecostal to Anglican, and it's been quite a journey. And what sparked this series of videos that I'm going to do on Anglicanism is that since I've moved, I've had conversations with people who know me, who love me, who they give me the benefit of the doubt. They're like, we trust Evan. We know Evan's not crazy, but we do not understand this transition from kind of like evangelical to a higher church tradition, right? So they're not looking at me suspect like, oh, this guy's crazy, this guy's evil. It's like, no, we know Evan, but like, why in the world would you do that? And then more than that, when you have those conversations, it sparks a lot of questions. Kind of the view of Christianity, of salvation, of worship, of things that are important, in kind of, we would say the evangelical, non-denominational kind of sphere, are very, very different from a more traditional standpoint of Christianity, something like Anglican, Lutheran, Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, something in that kind of realm. And so we're both coming from very, very different backgrounds. And so what I've done is I've spent my life in kind of the evangelical space. Now I've transitioned to a higher church space, and I think I bring a unique perspective. I'm able to kind of enter the mind of someone at maybe a kind of lower church, more modern contemporary church outlook, because that was me. And yet I've made this transition. And so I want to create a series of videos just answering questions, just saying like, hey, like what is this all about? You know, things like, why does your pastor dress like a wizard? You know what I mean? Like, why do you guys say all the pre-written prayers? Why do you place so much emphasis on baptism and communion, and what do they even do? And just sort of break those down. And so hopefully that'll be the content of my videos. And it's aimed at an audience that says, hey, we come from a Southern Baptist or Pentecostal or non-denominational or just some sort of lower church kind of background, and we have a lot of questions. And that's kind of my goal. So to kick off that series, I know that was kind of a ramble. Today, I just want to tell you 3 reasons that I became Anglican, or maybe three things that I appreciate about Anglicanism. And I'm not going to go so much into my own personal story. If you want to hear about my personal story, I'll in the description link a podcast that I was recently on, where I went through more of my kind of timeline and those kinds of things. Today, I just want to give you 3 things that I really appreciate about being Anglican after coming out of a more evangelical tradition. The first thing is this. Since becoming Anglican, I have felt a sense of rootedness. A sense of rootedness. Here's what I mean. If you come from kind of a more modern church, chances are your tradition is not quite as old, and maybe doesn't talk about church history as much as other traditions do. It's just not that important in kind of the identity of the tradition, right? So if you're like non-denominational, that sort of movement and vibe, kind of mega church, dark room, cool lights, great music. I love contemporary music. That kind of stems back to like 60s, 70s, 80s. Maybe we can say starts with the Jesus movement in the 60s and 70s, then the seeker-sensitive and kind of the 80s. So that's pretty young in that way of doing church. Or for me, I was Pentecostal, and our movement started in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's a pretty young movement. Even if you're something like, Baptists, you would probably trace your lineage back to English Baptist in the 1600s. And the church has been around for 2,000 years. I say all of that to say not to be critical or anything like that, but just to say since joining Anglicanism, there's this sense in which my roots and my theology and my worship and my practice, they predate me, and they predate my grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. Like they kind of go back to the beginning of the church, which I really, really appreciate. And so the way I do theology is I'm reading the Bible, and then I'm reading what the fathers and the theologians all throughout church history have had to say about that topic, and it's really, really important to me. Our worship dates back to the 1500s with the Book of Common Prayer, but that is modeled after older, more ancient prayers and forms of worship, kind of tracing back to the beginning of Christianity. Right? I was reading this guy named Justin Martyr, and Justin Martyr is writing in the early second century, and he describes Sunday worship in the early second century, and it looks an awful lot like what I do every single Sunday at my Anglican church. And so there's this sense in which I'm a part of something bigger than myself. I'm a part of something older than myself. It doesn't feel so recent and new, but like I'm participating in what the church has been doing for 2,000 years, which is really, really cool. As Anglicans, our bishops, our leaders can actually trace their lineage all the way back to the apostles. So the apostles ordained folks who ordained folks who ordained men who ordained men, all the way down to our bishops today. So there's this sense of connection and continuity that really matters a lot to me. The second is liturgical worship, right? So growing up in an evangelical space, most likely your church service is very, very simple, right? Everybody has a liturgy, or we'll just keep it simple, a worship structure. I should have defined that term earlier. So at a lower church, maybe it's something like you have 3 songs, your pastor preaches 45 minutes, maybe you have a prayer time and announcements, and then you're gone. Right? That's a liturgy. It's very, very simple and straightforward. What drew me to Anglicanism is the kind of liturgical structure of all of Anglicanism. So on Sunday morning, yes, there's a much more detailed structure to worship. We're very, very intentional in how we pray to God and how we worship to God. So rather than being like a very minimal, simple service, instead there's a lot packed in. And there's so much meaning and intentionality behind what's in our service. And it means a lot to me. And I hope on this channel I can kind of break down what that means. So there's symbolism, things like what the priest wears or how we decorate the altar, or the folks coming in carrying the cross or the candles. So that's symbolism. There are prayers, so are things that we say and things that we pray. There's things that we do with our bodies. So we sit and we stand and we kneel. All of that means a lot to me. But there's also kind of, just as we have a strong rhythm on Sunday mornings, it's very intentional. Anglicanism brings that for the whole life. So something that drew me was the Book of Common Prayer, our book of worship, which has a structure for daily prayer. And I wasn't very good at praying. I didn't really know how to pray. And it gave me the structure that told me when to pray. So it's got morning prayer, midday prayer, and evening prayer. So it gave me a time. then it told me what to pray. And so it has that really intentional pattern of like, how do I pray? And this is kind of how the church has prayed for thousands of years. And here's some things that matter. We're going to pray the Psalms together. We're going to work through the Bible. It gave me a Bible reading plan. And so within the Book of Common Prayer, it tells me the Old Testament and the New Testament we're reading today. And it gave me a healthy structure and pattern, is what I'm trying to say. Everything is very structural, rhythmic, habitual, and intentional. And so it kind of put the guardrails in my life that I needed to regularly grow towards God. And that means so much to me. It's even in the church calendar. So our years are structured and rhythmic, and they're structured after the pattern of Christ's life. So we have seasons of the church. We have Advent that then leads us into Christmas. And for us, Christmas is more than just a day. It's actually 12 days. And we have the season of Epiphany in which Jesus is teaching and doing miracles and revealing who he is. We have the season of Lent in which we think about Jesus walking towards the cross and we reflect on our sin. We have the season of Easter where we celebrate not just a day of his resurrection, but a whole period of 40 days, 50 days celebrating his resurrection. And then we get to Pentecost Sunday and we celebrate the arrival of the Spirit. There's just all of this intentional structure that I needed in my life. And it was really, really important. And so while I deeply appreciate the kind of minimalistic background that I came from, while I deeply appreciate the freedom that those worship services gave me with lots and lots of music and time to just sort of hang out in the front of the church and pray and those kinds of things, there's something that structure has done for my soul that I desperately needed as a human being. You know, we are what we do. And so I needed those healthy habits. The third thing is what we would call the sacraments. Now, that may not be a term you're familiar with. All I mean is baptism and the Lord's Supper. So in your tradition, it may be called ordinances. In our tradition, we call them sacraments. When I started studying church history and reading the fathers, something that I found is that the history of the church has put a lot more emphasis on baptism and the Lord's Supper than what I grew up with. So maybe you're in a tradition right now that says baptism and the Lord's Supper, they're just symbols. So God isn't specially present to do anything. God is not giving grace through these things. He's not saving us in any sense through baptism and the Lord's Supper. It's a personal kind of expression or remembrance. It's just a symbol, right? And so baptism is a public expression of my faith and something else that's happened to me. And the Lord's Supper, maybe it's something you do once a year or 4 times a year or something like that. And it's just a time to remember Jesus' sacrifice, and that's basically what it is. That's how I grew up. And what I've found is folks from those traditions still honor baptism and the Lord's Supper. They may view them as just symbols, but man, go to a Baptist baptism or a non-denominational or a Pentecostal baptism service. Man, folks are fired up. They're excited because Jesus has saved them and it's important to them. The Lord's Supper is usually very emotional, and it's a time of honest reflection and memory and worship and praise. And so what I don't want to say is that those people don't necessarily take them seriously, but their view of what's going on maybe is very different than where I'm at now. And I found that it was very different than the history of the church. And so for me, baptism is something that dispenses God's grace. It is a deliverer of God's grace. And I'm going to break this down in future videos. I don't mean to say that baptism is a work. Lord's Supper is not a work. These aren't good things we do for God. It's actually the other way around. It's good things God does for us. And so the emphasis is not on what I'm doing. The emphasis is actually on what God is giving to me. So those are kind of 3 overall factors, that sense of rootedness or tradition, that I'm a part of something bigger and older than myself, the rhythms and habits and structure that I've been given through the Book of Common Prayer, through the church calendar, through worship services on Sunday that are structured, and also the sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, believing that God is showing up in power and in grace to do something wonderful in my life and to give me his grace and his salvation. And so what I hope to do on this channel, however long it goes on, is to publish videos just answering questions that maybe folks from more evangelical backgrounds have. What do we believe about baptism? Why do we baptize infants? Why does your pastor dress like a wizard, like I mentioned at the beginning? Or any number of questions. I'm going to break it down in hopefully kind of normal language. I'm going to try not to theology nerd out and just say, hey, I fully understand where you're coming from because I was you. And I hope that I can kind of build a bridge so that you can understand where I'm coming from. So that if you are from maybe a lower church background, you may never become Anglican, or you may never become Lutheran, or you never may take an interest in liturgy. But I hope you can understand where we're coming from a little bit deeper and have appreciation for kind of the history of the church and its worship and kind of why we believe and do what we do. So thank you so much for being patient with me, for sticking around on the channel as long as you have, especially for those who are still subscribed. I know it's been a long time, and I hope to make a lot more videos and videos that are more consistent in the future. So I'll see you in the next one.